A little hard to make out there, but the chant "Cuomo must go." Thousands of New York gun owners descended on the state capitol in Albany today, protesting the state's new gun control law. And while gun advocates and gun rights supporters have staged similar rallies and protests for the general public, it is scenes and sounds like you just heard contrasted against the kinds of emotional pleas like the one we heard from a Newtown dad at a gun control hearing in Washington yesterday.
It's hard for me to be here today talking about my deceased son. I have to. I'm his voice. I'm not here for the sympathy and a pat on the back, as many people stated in the town of Newtown. I'm here to speak up for my son.
Now, the debate over gun control will heat up in the next few weeks as Congress weighs which measures to focus on, and one of them is likely to be for universal background checks. There is support for expanding checks. I mean, 92% of Americans think it's a good idea, and some pro-gun Republicans already on board with the idea, but others say they're worried that if they move on background checks, the NRA will move on them. And I want to bring Andrew back in for this one because, listen, nothing surprises anymore, but as I always say, 92% of Americans can't agree on anything. And 3/4 of the NRA members support this idea, but yet it's a dangerous proposition for lawmakers to do.
And Rich, this is one of the areas that can get lost in the weeds a little bit because we know what assault weapons are, or people have an idea of what they are. People know what an extended ammo clip is, but what exactly is a background check? Well, for potential gun buyers, this is what a background check is. It's a 3-page form, doesn't take longer than 5 or 10 minutes to fill out. Would-be gun buyers are asked some simple and understandably pertinent questions like, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Is there a protection order out against you? And have you ever been held mentally deficient? You see some of the yes and no questions there. That data is then entered into a computer system run by the FBI to see if the buyer's name comes up for any of those disqualifying factors. If they are, the sale's not supposed to be allowed. If they're not, the customer can walk out of the store with their new gun. But the system has flaws. Some states don't update their data, so the FBI files are, in some cases, woefully out of date. And some sales aren't covered, sales from one individual to another or sales at a gun show. And those are the holes in the system that any new laws on background checks would attempt to fix. And it turns out, as Rich mentioned, making background checks better is a popular idea. 92% of Americans say they support universal background checks. Even 74% of NRA members say they agree. So who doesn't agree on background checks? The NRA and lawmakers worried about crossing the gun group.
And when it comes to background checks, let's be honest. Background checks will never be universal because criminals will never submit to them.
That his testimony to Congress just a few weeks ago, even though Wayne LaPierre of the NRA held the exact opposite position as recently as 1999.
We think it's reasonable to provide mandatory instant criminal background checks for every sale at every gun show. No loopholes anywhere for anyone.
As for lawmakers, many are taking a wait-and-see approach, trying to measure the political damage that a gun control vote might cause them, while others are trying to find arguments against background checks, like this exchange at a Senate hearing yesterday.
If we're going to expand background checks, it looks to me like we ought to start enforcing the law that's on the books. We say one thing, how important it is, but in the real world, we absolutely do nothing to enforce the laws on the books. Now, let's talk.
Just for the record, from my point of view, Senator, the purpose of the background check.
How many cases have you made? How many cases?
You know what? It doesn't matter. It's a paper thing.
Well,
I want to stop 76. I want to finish the answer.
Well, no,
I want to stop 76,000 people from buying guns illegally. That's what a background check does. If you think we're going to do paperwork prosecutions, you're wrong. We don't chase paper. We chase armed criminals.
Not the police chief of Milwaukee with Senator Lindsey Graham there, and Senator Graham got all kinds of flack online in some quarters for holding firm to his opposition to background checks, especially in light of that testimony.
And you know what? I like Lindsey Graham. I know you're less crazy about him than I am. I respect him. Lately, he's been taking some very curious positions and stuff, but shame on him and shame on others who disregard the public will. But more importantly, what's the one common thing that's come out of this? Background checks should be the easiest thing that we do. They try to find a problem with doing anything. And if you follow this logic, after every tragedy we'd have in this country, we wouldn't do anything because something might not be perfect. Well, for crying out loud, it can't be worse. What was the number we said, Andrew? How many people have died since Newtown in this country at the end of a gun?
I think we're over 2,200 at this point.
2,200 people have died since Newtown. And I'm sure there are different cases and all the rest. But the point is, acknowledge you have a problem. And if you acknowledge you do, which I hope to God everybody in this country does, then do something about it. And Vince, it's like I'm on a PSA here to try and help out the Republican Party for crying out loud. The public wants this, okay? And I'm beating you up, but I'm telling you, for crying out loud, 92% of Americans want this. 3/4 of the NRA wants this. This ain't tough. Do it. And if there's a hole in it, then correct the hole. Plug the hole. There's another one. Fix that one. But don't sit on your hands and say, oh, it's too hard. There'll be a little problem here or there. Have a little bit of a backbone. Tell the NRA where they can stick it and do the right thing. This ain't hard.
Well, and I don't think this is necessarily about backbone as much. It's about.
Oh, it's political cowardice going on.
It's definitely political. But what we need to make sure is that a background check, and I believe that there's a reason that you've seen the NRA back off of the background check, and that's because they're going to need room to move on this. And I think you're going to see background checks will happen. I think background checks are reasonable, but where do they lead? At a time when you have the governor of New York, but actually I do. But at a time when you've got
had the vice president telling everybody how much he loves his shotgun here and how he wants to tell grandma to go pack heat. Okay,
right.
So,
but you also
he's not going to come kick your door down and take your guns away. They can't pass in a wall.
But you also,
you're.
That's my point exactly. You also have the Vice President of the United States telling people how to illegally use that shotgun. There's an education problem when it comes to guns in this country. People that aren't gun owners, people who don't understand about gun ownership and gun use, and this is what we've seen in New York. We've seen the governor haphazardly try to push legislation through to try to remedy a problem.
Republicans went along on, by the way, in New York. 17 of them in the U.S. and the New York State Senate. I don't want to bring up the facts in this, but they did.
That's going to be their mistake, and they're going to have to live with that vote. They will live with that vote because it's a big mistake on most of their part, especially in their districts. But that's something that happened.
Tom, you're better than me at this. You know how these things end. Okay, my point is, come on.
I think you've said it exactly the way it needs to be said.
But where does, and this is it, somebody is going to have to answer the question first. Once the cooler heads have to prevail
and
here,
say this much. You know what? We tried the assault weapons ban. Today's the anniversary, right, Andrew, of when the thing got passed and put in place in '94, right? Wait a minute. We're not going to go there. But here's what I'll say for you Democrats and Mr. President. As much as it's going to cost us some political capital, we want to get ahead. We, the Republican Party, want to go for universal background checks. Do your own press conference. Don't make the president do it. Get out ahead of it and say, and more than that, we're going to do a universal database. We're going to keep the data. But you know what? We want to have a republic. We want to have an appointee that's going to be part of the council to make sure that no one's rights are infringed. President would be in a corner. He'd have to take the deal and say thank you.
But you can't have a database. That's the problem, and that's where a background check.
If you make the states do it, damn skip you can.
You can't have a database.
Why?
No reason. Why are we putting law-abiding citizens into a database?
I'm sorry. Do you drive a car?
Well, sure.
And okay. And don't you have to get insurance?
And I'm still.
And don't you have to get a driver's license? You're in a database, pal.
Then why aren't gun owners in a database?
Because right now the NRA can say what they want to do and not want to do.
You still have to file for a license, and it also brings up the.
I want to get a fishing license. I'm in a database.
But it also brings up the question of enforcement. Right now, a felon cannot. It's illegal for a felon in this country to fill out a pistol permit. And you know who's in charge of enforcing that? The Department of Justice.
You realize what you are defending. The status quo is by definition clinically insane. And we're going to say that we're going to try and keep the status quo in place because we're fighting for the rights of maybe. I mean, come on.
No. I'm not saying. Again, I think we can move toward universal background checks. But where does the other side move to more reasonable gun laws or gun restrictions? Go after the criminals. You do it every day of your life. That's all I think the gun owners and the sportsmen are saying. Go after the criminals. Go after the people who are misusing the guns.
You can't do one without the other.
Well, I don't agree with that.
If there's not a database, what's the point of having universal background checks if you can't check if this creep has a restraining order on in another state? You gotta have one with the other.
But if they have a restraining order, they shouldn't be able to get the gun in the first place. We already have a wait period. We already have a 5-day wait period.
All right, we take a break here. When we come back, I'm segueing all over the place here, but we head to Rome. It was the Pope's final day here. I don't think we can bring Congress into this one, although we'll try. We're going to tell you what happened there and what might happen coming up.